Welcome to another episode of From Garage to Growth, and this is the podcast where we delve into the world of entrepreneurship and its impact on economic independence. In today's episode, we will journey through the South African startup scene and just explore its resilience, its growth trajectory, and the potential for entrepreneurship as a driver for economic self-reliance. And so today, our guest is Will Green, a seasoned startup builder and investor, and he will just share his insights from drawn from 24 years within the South African ecosystem, building startups, helping startups grow, and as well mentoring other founders. So to get the thing started, I'd just like to give you the floor and just introduce yourself and give us an idea of who Will Green is.
Sure. So thanks for this, Brian. I'm an entrepreneur and advisor as well as an investor in high growth companies. And generally in the early stages, I started my first business in 2006 and was a solopreneur. So I understand the journey that a founder takes when they do start a business. And effectively, I help entrepreneurs not make the mistakes that I made, and also to help sort of navigate this complex world of business building. And that's who I am.
Yeah, so with your 24 years within the South African ecosystem, can you share with us some of the pivotal moments that have somewhat shaped your approach with regards to how you handle businesses, how you handle building these communities within the South African ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think being based in South Africa, where there's not that much venture capital, has been both a curse but also an advantage to building sort of very sustainable sort of businesses. Some of those, it's been a long journey. I do say that I'm in a fortuitous position to have never worked at a corporate, but always been an entrepreneur. So it essentially, it's all I know really, I think. And I think some of those sort of pivotal moments have been through many different cycles. So I started my career in the sort of startup world working for a digital publishing company all the way back in 2000, just as the .com bubble got burst, and quickly pivoted from being a marketing manager with a budget to a sales manager. So essentially there's been about 3 cycles that I've been through. So generally it's during those what do they call troughs, as opposed to peaks, is where you actually learn the most about yourself, but also about the businesses that you work with and the founders that you work with.
So you touched on the notion of this hit and curse of being within the South African ecosystem with regards to not having access to capital. So the South African ecosystem does have varying of barriers that are kind of limiting people going into the startup scene. So as the time you spent in the South African startup scene, what led you to develop platforms such as the Board of Wisdom and Capital Engine? What was the idea around you building those 2 platforms?
Sure. So when I worked with the VC running the accelerator program, I took a bit of a break to understand where could I add the most value, where were the spaces that needed the most help for the next kind of generation of startups and founders. And the 2 areas which were clear, one was actually the access to capital. We need more capital in the total African VC space. I think it's only 1% of global VC, but we've got over, I think it's about 14% of the GDP and about 17% of the population. So there's the need for capital was the key thing, but also making it easier also for people who have got shares in startups to be able to sell it so that there's liquidity. So also in the sort of secondaries market, so Capital Engine is essentially a financial platform to help drive access to capital to early stage companies and investments. But also we're looking at building a secondaries marketplace to help, investors, retail investors, even general partners and some founders and employees to be able to get liquidity of their shares, because it has been over sort of 10 years that the sort of African VC market has really sort of matured. So liquidity back into the ecosystem is a good thing. So that's the one side with Capital Engine, and working with Brian and his team on that side to go to market and to make sure that we have great companies on the platform, but also working with the ecosystem, such as all the funders as well. And then the second point that is sorely sort of absent and missing is the access to experience, wisdom, skills. So, the Board of Wisdom was a startup that I created with 3 other co-founders. Johan, now who's ex, Gumtree general manager for South Africa, then worked at OLX in Indonesia and then let go in Turkey, came back to South Africa, and we were sort of chatting about how we could work together. And he was getting a lot of these opportunities with these sort of small sort of consulting gigs, but we realized that there were people like us where if we network this wisdom to be incredibly valuable for startups. And that was where that was the birth of the Board of Wisdom, which effectively helps VCs and CEOs and boards to, with specific problems that they might have. Whether it's restructuring some debt funding, whether it's getting ready to list on a stock exchange, so from sort of Series A all the way through to exit, we've got over sort of 15 members who can help at any stage of the startups. And it's very much a sort of a referral based model where we're building a network of, I call it, people that you go to business war with, people that you worked with and you've kind of stress tested them, so that you can actually have this level of expertise. Because I think in South Africa, as an example, I think there are very few tech businesses that have over 100 staff. But if you go to the UK or other mature ecosystems, having a startup with over 1,000 employees is common, so we kind of filling that gap, which is really needed in Africa and other emerging markets.
And to touch on this notion of building and access to knowledge, do you think that there's sometimes a gatekeeping culture within South Africa in terms of knowledge transfer and sharing knowledge, people not wanting to kind of share their experiences to other people, inspiring to be in the startup scene?
Yeah, I think it's such a small market. I think there's been very few people that that have been successful. So it's a very sort of burgeoning young ecosystem. And I think it just goes to the business models. I think, there's a clear business model for VCs where, there's a sort of a management fee, a 2 and 20 for the money and the funds that they look after and deploy. And then obviously on the startup side, there's a model for hiring CEOs and C-suite. But I think when it comes to kind of ecosystem building and skills transfer, which kind of sits in the middle, it's a very hard business. Running an accelerator, the business model is quite hard. It's almost like an event business. Each year you got to sort of ask your donors or your sponsors, for money. But it's a valuable part of the sort of deal flow and helping to develop the ecosystem and the sort of the ecosystem builders, if you want to call it that. So I think that's where the challenge lies at the moment. And in all these small, sort of ecosystems.
Yeah. So within, like, you spoke about your highs that you had, and that they were like, they might not be really that high, but there were those moments that you actually learned more about yourself. So throughout those failures and those moments of, am I doing the right thing? What lessons did you learn from those failures, and how have they influenced your approach currently?
So I think the more you mature, you realize, that an ego can be a bad thing. In some cases, having the confidence to start a venture is what you need. It's almost like you ask any founder, not knowing what you know now, would you start? And everyone would say, like, definitely no.
Yeah.
So I think, really, I think it's having an ego where, and essentially also, um, ensuring that failure isn't a failure. It's actually a lesson, so whether you've, the business you started, was not successful, the way that you should look at it is it's a chapter. As long as you obviously have ensured that you looked after your employees and your shareholders, and communicated everything quite clearly with them. So I think in the sort of the African ecosystem sort of lends itself to almost like the European approach where, there's a lot of pride and people don't want to sort of, share their sort of failures and stuff. But, versus the US where you won't get funding if you haven't failed at starting a startup. So I think the ecosystem very much aligned to a more conservative kind of European sort of market as opposed to the American market where, it's a badge of honor to fail at a startup, and you only get funded if you kind of a serial entrepreneur. So yeah, I think that's definitely one of the lessons. Yeah.
Yeah, because that shows experience that you've been there before. And for some reason, the fear of failure that people have is kind of one of the reasons that's keeping people from starting startups. Especially with the mindset back home with the youth, especially. Everyone is like, if I fail, people will see me, like people will know. Like, I can't do it. It will tarnish either my name and I won't be able to move within the ecosystem ever again. So that mentality keeps people from wanting to do, starting to even to start with.
Yeah, we've got a very complicated, sort of, environment here because, even trying to convince your parents that you want to start this thing called a startup and that you've graduated from university and you're not going to get a salary and you can't pay anything to the family. It's something that any African, who's been, who's got into university, trying to convince Gogo that, that you've got this amazing idea and business potential, where it's a lot more, acceptable if you go work at a bank or at a consulting firm, and not start your own business. But that's fine as well. I'm a big believer, like in sales, I say, if you're going to hire a salesperson, the first thing you do is you say no, and then you observe like how much they kind of counter that no. Similarly with an entrepreneur, I always advise young entrepreneurs, I say, listen, no, you shouldn't be an entrepreneur. You should go actually work in a corporate. But if they're very much, obsessed and say, no, but this idea, it's so now's the time to do it, then that shows their sort of, commitment and sort of, fortitude to kind of, go ahead with that business.
Yeah, you definitely need to have that hunger to stay in it, especially in those tough and difficult moments of running a business. You need to be fully invested in whatever you're doing in that moment. So, yeah. So, I want to touch on the current digital boom that's currently happening within, AI and technology. How do you see technology as this mechanism of helping emerging entrepreneurs kind of access more opportunities that were not available before?
Yeah, I think the way that I always sort of approach, advising entrepreneurs, is it's a mindset thing. You've got to have this kind of curiosity around, new technology, but, and being able to kind of utilize, the tools that you've got at your fingertips. So I think, each kind of generation, and there's a few of them, there's a bit of a hype cycle that emerges around sort of new technologies. But the only way to understand them is to actually tinker with them and to experiment with them so you can understand, what they can do for you and your business. I always share with entrepreneurs, like I always like hold up my phone and say, with this phone, this is like 13 million times more powerful computer than the computer that landed on the moon, and so there's actually no excuse to not, build something, like, and start something. So it is a sort of a mindset approach. Um, and I think especially with the sort of the generative AI sort of boom, I think they're very valuable tools to be able to compete with incumbents, because you're like a speedboat. You can kind of move fast. You can try different things. But I think that, where this, having worked at a European deep tech accelerator, it's called Planet 43, where I was the program lead recently on 10 deep tech companies, where they're looking at applied AI and how they're building businesses, whether it's in Norway or Singapore or Sri Lanka or Israel or the US. And the key where I think the value is going to be is not in these sort of application AIs, where you've got a little bit of a chat GBT sort of approach to something. It's going to be in these applied AIs. So how is it being applied in a specific industry? And the gold is really in the data sets. When it comes to AI, you need the data in order to be training these models. So that's where the gold is.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. So I just want to touch on so you wrote a book, and that book had a touch of some AI influence into it. So that experience, can you touch on that experience and how you came about to kind of envision the book itself?
Yeah. So I've got a theory. I think firstly, I studied science at university, and this was at a point where, Elon Musk wasn't talking about first principles. It was very uncool to study science and maths at university. So, but what I took from that was the scientific method, and, is such a valuable method especially for entrepreneurs, where you have a hypothesis, you test it, and then and then from there you kind of, you learn, there's no failure in science. So with that approach, I was just very curious about, generative AI. I've always sort of wanted to write a book. When OpenAI released their sort of very early ChatGPT model, I kind of experimented it and wrote an article on LinkedIn. And when I wrote that article, you literally have to type in paragraphs, and then it would come back with copy. So you'd have to sort of stitch together an article with these paragraphs that were created from sentences. And so when I was very curious about communities, and having started a community of hikers in the ecosystem here who climb Lion's Head every Friday morning at 6:00. I do believe that communities are going to be the next companies. You're going to start a community first, and the company will spawn out of that. So I wrote a book called, F the Algorithm, Build Real Communities. And I sort of prompted I think it was Bard at the time, different questions, so that I basically created a book. I put it into the Apple book template. I created a cover. And essentially it's probably, I would say, at least 70% myself, but again, obviously using a ChatGPT or Bard, Gemini now, bit of a tool, so I just also wanted to prove to myself that you could write a book using this tool. And subsequently, I'm actually doing next week at Innovation City here in Cape Town. I'm actually doing a talk around building communities off this book. So someone saw it and they said, no, we really want you to come and talk about building communities, because they're very big on building communities around sort of co-working space.
Yeah. So recently I saw an art, like a post that you had on LinkedIn on AI generated information, and in terms of how do you distinguish AI generated from actual human centric information? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I've sort of been overrun, and I'm sure everyone has been, with people sort of experimenting with these tools. But you can get a good sense that it's been well crafted by someone else. It lacks kind of soul. So all the kind of posts that I produce, I use, I write myself, and content I sort of craft myself, but I'll also distinctly say that it's made by Will Green et al. And the et al. is the AI. But, and I was just thinking of a way myself a way that you can sort of verify that was kind of written by a human. So I was almost like saying you almost want to put little sort of, what are they called? Like Easter eggs in each kind of piece of content. And then when you stitch them together, it says a word, like that essentially that you put in there, but again, it got a lot of people commenting. So, I did sort of tag in Christine Strutt, who's an IP lawyer and expert at Von Seidel's, to basically give her perspective, which was quite interesting. And also, Bronwyn, who's a futurist, and she's very clued up with different ways in which this could be done. But I think in the future, there will be a way in which, you can own your content and people will know that you were the one that created it. However, you can also say that 80% of this was created with the aid of a co-pilot or an AI or whatever that might be.
Yeah, it was, I think when things like Mid Journey and now Sora popping up, the fear amongst, especially the artist community has been such, I don't know. Sometimes some people go, oh, it's overreaction. And some people are like, oh, it's taking our work. So when you look at it, you can just go on Mid Journey or anywhere and just type in these prompts, and then it will give you artwork relating to that. Well, before you would need to get a graphic designer, but now that's kind of removed. So people are like, oh, it's going to remove our jobs completely. But other people are like, some artists have taken to it in terms of making their lives much easier. So people are applying these things differently, and other people are like, no, you guys don't understand. It's growing too fast. We're not ready for it yet. So it's an interesting topic for the next few years.
And it's very interesting to look at the user sort of, agreement that you sign when you use like a Mid Journey or ChatGPT or a Gemini, because in some cases, you might grant the AI a license, so you don't physically own the IP of that work that gets generated, through using the software. So you've got to be, quite mindful of that as well, because at the end of the day, it is all about IP. And IP is defined as a creation of the mind, so it can be very broad. We're creating IP here, right now, as an example,
Yeah. And intellectual property is it's a touchy one. It's good. And it's going to be.
We got to show the listeners that we are actually real, O'Brien. I don't know what that would look like in podcasting world, but,
I guess in podcasting world, since we have two variations, we have the audio and we have the video. So the video is the actual, proof of us talking. But recently there's been this boom of, music that's been produced by AI, and you can't tell the difference at all. Was the voice sounds human, the lyrics sound like someone actually sat down and wrote it. So if you just have an audio and you can like, oh, you can run a podcast and just AI will like say you write a topic about today about startups, and the AI will have it in a whole 50 plus video audio just talking about entrepreneurship. So now how do you as a listener know that's an actual person? Like you don't.
Yeah.
The voice is so genuine.
Yeah. It's always something I say, it's like having startup ideas, where people will come to you and say, oh, I've got this startup idea for an app or something, it's all about the execution, it's actually getting off your bum and executing and getting it done, So I think with a lot of these tools, you can prompt ChatGPT all you want as to kind of how to build something. At the end of the day, you've got to actually go out and build it and ship it and sell it. I think I'm very sort of bullish on sort of the human elements. So I do believe sort of physical human interaction and events are going to be a premium, because as we saw during COVID, we lacked it, and we had a little bit of an experiment of what that could be like, so which we didn't like as humans who are generally social creatures.
Yeah, definitely. I think that human interaction was kind of, I think it was the first time even people that were generally were okay living by themselves were like, you know what, let me move back with my parents. I need people around me because you were not seeing anyone. So you need that human interaction. Even with AI coming up, people will still need that genuine human interaction or feeling of someone actually wrote this. So yeah, so human currency is a big thing that will not be removed from
Definitely.
but its applicability can be enhanced with AI for some jobs. So it's a great thing. So I do want to move back into South Africa and the Africa entrepreneurship space. So with Africans facing, as we said, various of issues, how has the South African startup scene kind of preserved and has gotten this resilience currently that even though the infrastructure is not that great, it's to a degree it functions. How is the South African entrepreneurship ecosystem kind of had this well? How have they demonstrated this resilience apart from other African startup scenes?
Yeah, so I think there's been a sort of a rebalancing where previously sort of ecosystems like Kenya and Nigeria were booming and attracting a lot of capital. I think people were somehow sort of staying clear of South Africa because there's always been this kind of political risk sort of factor down here with from a political point of view. Because I think in most cases our media is free and fair. So when there is corruption, the world hears about it, so it's actually a good thing, when you hear about these corruptions and stuff, whereas you might not see that in other parts of the continent. So it is a curse, but it's important for democracy and obviously a thriving economy. So I think, and with that, has been the fact that, the VCs here have been quite sort of mature and essentially there's not that much capital. So obviously they can pick the best sort of deals. And obviously after COVID, you could see, which were the companies that were growing despite the hiccup of COVID. So, as South Africans, I always say we generally build pretty good businesses because, there's no capital. So you've got to build, businesses that generate revenue, that generate profits, and generally, have a lot of constraints, whether it's lack of power, lack of governmental support. But generally as an economy, I always say it's a perfect place to build because you've got combination of an informal market and a formal market. I always say that you can pick up a Smiley in Alex, which is probably 5 kilometers away from being able to buy a Louis Vuitton handbag at Samson City. And you can build sort of a retail tech platform to service the informal market or the more formal market. So it's a great sort of sandbox to test, and then be able to export it into other parts of the world. So yeah, and I think the diaspora and the expat community is very valuable to support the growth of South African companies outside of our borders.
Yeah. So recently you did this interview and one of the things you mentioned was bootstrapping and how it's kind of given people an opportunity to move away from the general traditional modes of funding, like getting a bank loan. And with that, how has this notion of bootstrapping within the South African ecosystem helped kind of startups thrive?
Yeah, so I think it all comes down to, I always say like you either in business, you're either a buyer or seller, and startups are all sellers, like essentially you've got to get someone to buy your product. And I think, bootstrapping is effectively, for those, just definition wise is being able to fund and grow your business through, your customers. Your customers will buy from you. There'll be profit in that purchase. And then you can reinvest in your own business. So it's not relying on external capital in the form of venture capital or angel or seed capital at the some different stages. Angel's the first sort of pot of money, then seed capital, and then sort of VC series A sort of funding is your next kind of bucket of funding. So yeah, and I think in some cases with the likes of these AI tools, you can, and like we saw with cloud computing, where you didn't have to spend a hell of a lot of money on a server, you could kind of have it hosted on the cloud. The barrier to entry and the cost of entry to create businesses has come down. So therein lies the opportunity. And the one thing for certain in South Africa and Africa, I always say that there's a lot of challenges that we've got, and the challenges offer a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs to build businesses to solve for those challenges. So, I do see, I'm very bullish Africa in general and emerging markets where tech can leapfrog the incumbents to solve for those problems.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I think the uniqueness of Africa is that we have all these issues with each respective countries, and all those issues offer prospective entrepreneurs opportunities to kind of get into that market and come up with a solution. So that's one of the good things of, well, one of the advantages of being in the African ecosystem is that there is issues, those issues need solving. If there's people willing to solve those issues, you get a market that you can access.
Yeah, exactly. And it was quite interesting. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Go on.
Yeah, I was saying that I did last year before last, I was in Kigali with the Google for Startups team, and they were sort of they were funding 50 startups in Africa, and it was quite interesting comparing all the different markets, and I was quite surprised by the amount of B2C startups that were sort of in Kenya, Nigeria, and other markets where, the corporate or the enterprise market was not as developed, and it's sort of, and whereas in South Africa, there was a lot more B2B kind of businesses. So it's also quite interesting each market is different, but the ability to build a sort of a B2C business with the likes of social media and influencers, was quite interesting, and an opportunity, for homegrown innovation through entrepreneurs building these things.
Yeah, definitely. So the other thing that a thriving startup scene needs is sometimes exits and scaling. So in order for ecosystem to thrive, you need those things to kind of happen. So how can exits within the startup scene in South Africa kind of help grow the ecosystem?
Yeah. So, if the stat I shared with you, that there's between sort of $5 and $6 billion of VC funding that comes into Africa. Just if you take a sort of a macro view out, and if other international investors wants to invest in Africa VC sector, there has to be liquidity that comes through the market every year. So an additional at least 5 or 6 billion is exiting or realizing out of the market in order for it to become, you can actually get returns out of Africa, so, and there's only trade sales, mergers and acquisitions, exits, whatever you want to call it, are a way in which you can get liquidity out of the market, for the founders, but also for the investors that back those companies. South Africa is kind of quite unique in the market in that we are very successful at generating these exits. And obviously the exits allow for the capital to come back into the market, because those founders will say, hey, I've got some money now. I want to invest in the next generation. And it's quite interesting to see a lot of the founders who have exited actually start to put money into VC funds and also start to writing angel checks, in partnership with other people. So, exits are, and also you're always, there's two sort of times you'll see, that are sort of milestones for a VC fund or for a startup. It's generally for the VC, it's when they raise a fund, they've closed a fund. And then secondly is when they exit a portfolio company, or, because it's showing that you can take a business, you can raise funding, and you can find companies that actually exit. So it's kind of a two sort of sides of the equation of VC, and a very valuable one. So, and if you think about it, the market, South Africa is quite a unique market because everything is priced in rands, so as the dollar strengthens, you can get incredibly good value. And essentially incredibly good operators who are sort of battle hardened, can work hard with not many resources. And this has been validated by a lot of international companies that I've spoken to, where they say, listen, our South African development team is just like by far better than our international teams, because you guys have just been able to build with very little oxygen, in the markets. One actual big investment house, I think it was Credit Suisse, came to visit South Africa, and he commented, he said, listen, you like building businesses at the Everest base camp here. There's no oxygen, but somehow you're managing to summit Mount Everest and come back, alive. And it's quite enduring. When you do visit the ecosystem, you can sense the passion and the energy that exists here.
No, it's definitely like a skill set that you can only get once you're in the environment back home. So one of the other things as well is the notion of scaling and expanding one's company. So how can startups successfully navigate this process of scaling outside of South Africa, and not just scaling within the African ecosystem, but going international as well? How can companies maneuver that sphere?
So I always, it's how you start is how you end. It's a mindset thing as well. You can always see this by how a company, what domain do they have registered for their business? I always see sort of, I'm always impressed with obviously the .coms, versus the .co.za's, because they clearly are thinking bigger, around where they can sort of, go with their business and their company. So I think, the challenge is it's incredibly hard to do, to be able to scale. We just look at Yoko as an example, very successful, fintech company here in South Africa, funded by Partech and other funders. They've stayed in South Africa. It's only sort of some of the sort of listed entities which have got sort of offices in sort of across the continent, whether it's Standard Bank or ABSA, Barclays and the likes, and generally the banks and the telcos that kind of have scaled on the continent. So it's incredibly difficult to do, but, having just run a market access accelerator program as part of I mentioned Planet 43, this accelerator program for R3I Capital. And this was a market access accelerator for global deep tech companies into Japan, so it was very quickly understanding a market. But the bottom line is you need people on the ground that can help navigate that process, and to really give you a sense of what each market is all about, and it's a lot harder when there's sort of regulations. If it's medical technology and you've got to sort of, you've got to first have clinical trials, you've got to have the right sort of medical sort of accreditation, so it's having those people on the ground who can support you. So, and obviously if there's a cultural barrier or a language barrier, that can also take a lot of time to get over, so yeah, there's a lot to consider, but it all comes down to, having a phenomenal product, and generally, ensuring that there is demand for it, from overseas. And I learned from some of my mistakes in business, and the fact that, I looked after Yahoo's business in sub-Saharan Africa, and the Yahoo, as a company, we were sort of beholden to what corporate strategy was being driven from corporate, and they sort of saw themselves as a media business. So they would have to have a newsroom, a new .co.uk or .co.za, which took a lot of money and a lot of time to launch. Whereas you just had Google.com, who was kind of launching in every market, and they were very profitable because they were driving revenues back to Ireland or where it was at that stage from the continent. And they saw themselves as a tech company. So it's also quite important to understand how you define your company and which sector you are sort of playing in. And that's always very important. Also, when you are wanting to sell your business, making sure that you register the business in a category which is very high multiples, because you'll be able to sell your business for a lot more, if you are a sort of an AI business versus if you are an ed tech business, as an example.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely comes with this know where you're going before you start. So when you do get there, you have all your eggs in a row, and then you know what you need to do. So
Definitely.
we spoke about how South Africa is such a unique ecosystem. So in terms of having the formal and informal sector. So the informal sector, I think I read a book recently and they dubbed it casinomics, which I thought it was a great description to have for the formal sector, for the informal sector. So I just want to touch on some of the like stats within the informal sector and like the production within there. So the backroom renting earnings are shown to be valued at around 20 billion. So the haircut, which is your saloons, your barbers, they generate over 10 billion. And your fast food, as you mentioned, your smileys generate over 90 billion per year. So this is a thriving space within the South African ecosystem, but it's unregulated. How do you think can we implement a system that this gets partially entered within the same ecosystem or the same manner as the informal sector?
Yeah, so I'm very, Gigi Alcock, who wrote that book, he's a bit of a sage of the Kazinomics, sector. And, he's rightfully, said that a lot of the sort of unemployment stats are kind of formal, unemployment, 60% unemployment. But if you take into consideration the gogo who's got a kind of a spaza shop, or has got a quarter stand, versus the sort of obviously the shebeens and the salons and fast food and stuff, there's a lot of the cash business being generated in those economies. So I think that, I'm very bullish the sort of informal sort of, tech sector, where people are coming up with solutions for that market, and to the Nako, which is basically a platform for, it's like, for hairdressers to be able to book chairs and book clients and schedule people, is one entrepreneur that I've been sort of supporting via WhatsApp mentoring. I do a lot of sort of LinkedIn direct message and WhatsApp mentoring with a lot of these entrepreneurs who reach out to me. And same as with Israel, Izzy, who started Amarum in Tembisa, which is effectively an Airbnb for backrooms, because the Amma backroom, or Amma double story is a sort of a very, it's basically, especially in a place like Tembisa that service the Mall of Africa, people are constantly looking for accommodation to be close to work, is a thriving business and industry. So I do believe, especially in those informal markets, technology will make them a lot more formal, and a way to kind of capture value, to grow and to kind of, add value to the economy. But I think that is always a number that is missing from the stats. While we talk about a large portion of unemployment, a lot of it is, driven in the informal sector. You hear stories of gogos who are selling quarters outside primary schools, who are funding their children's or their grandchildren's education to university, because they sell so many a day.
Yeah.
And I think those are the actual real heroes in this country, and should be celebrated, with what they're doing but don't get the credit,
Yeah, exactly. It's one sector that's not, well, the tension is there, but it's not there to the degree that we put this, like formal companies at this pedestal of this is where you need to be, but there's people doing great things that are not getting the same eyes as those other companies. So
exactly. And I'm inspired. Sorry, there was the sort of the Chasing the Sun too, that documentary about the sort of Springboks and winning the World Cup in France, and being world champions. I recently did a sales, workshop for an accelerator here in South Africa, Savant. And the stories of the founders in the room were absolutely amazing. I was just like saying, we've got to tell these stories of these founders who like one guy, who was at, Bandile, basically has done everything from being, at the Navy in Simonstown to starting a Chinese restaurant with a friend at university to basically, translating German, for a client and just a complete polymath. But the way in which he's come to, the sort of waste recycling for generating sort of insect protein, is phenomenal, but through the experience of trying and do all these different things, thundering, really sort of hustling, it's kind of contributed to his ability to actually execute and be successful. So those are the types of entrepreneurs that we need to highlight. And there's thousands of those stories. I think, unfortunately, South Africans are quite humble. We rely on our parents and friends to tell us how amazing we are. But again, because it's not seen as a quality where you're bragging and you're saying how awesome you are. So it's people like yourself and other media people, and myself as well to highlight these entrepreneurs. And quite recently, I've sort of, in April said, listen, I'm inviting entrepreneurs to take over my LinkedIn page for them to actually tell their story. And it's got amazing traction, like with 15,000 views and people getting reached out by corporates for their products. It's been phenomenal, and I'll continue to actually do it. Anyone wants their business, featured on my LinkedIn, by all means connect with me and let's see where that goes.
Yeah, definitely. People, the only thing that's missing is just giving them a platform, or just people doing great things out there. So
exactly.
You spoke about the unemployment rate in South Africa, and currently the youth unemployment rate is sitting at around 63.9%. And that's roughly around 3.3 million individuals from the ages under 15 to 25. So those are people that are generally unemployable, either seeking work, cannot find it. So how do you think, how can South Africa leverage its youthful unemployment rate to be more part of the ecosystem or build infrastructures that help these people get employability?
Yeah, there's the Yes program, which is doing some great work, where essentially they pay interns to work for your company. You just need to host them and mentor them. So it's initiatives like that which will help, the entrepreneurs. And I also say that, there's always been, I think it's all these false promises that South Africans have been told, back in the day, the sort of the political slogan was homes and jobs for all. I think the reality is that, it's kind of like there's no one coming to save you. Bottom line, you've got to save yourself. You've got to create value yourself. And I think it's a mindset change for the youth to understand that, you've got to create value. You've got to, and I think if you think of where the world's gone with the tools like Fiverr and Freelancer and all these sort of these tools, also a lot of these sort of gig platforms, like if you've got an internet connection and you've got the mindset, effectively you could become a personal assistant to someone in the UK if you wanted to, so the tools are there. You just need that mindset within the youth to kind of ignite that potential. And I think, and only the parents of those children and the community of those children, can encourage that, and, unfortunately, the other side of the coin is crime, that, hey, you see someone driving a fancy car with amazing clothes and you say, oh, well, how did they get that? And unfortunately, that's the other side of the coin, so yeah, I think, and as we know, that's the wrong form of entrepreneurship, that you want to encourage.
Definitely not the ideal thing. I get that. It is. So you spoke about this shifting of mindsets. How do you think universities or educational institutes can help change this shifting of mindsets.
Mm.
What strategies can they implement to kind of shift their learners or their students into being more entrepreneurship savvy?
I think it comes down to just the environments and also the students that come there. Like I was a product of the University of Cape Town, and I was speaking to the founder of Harambings, the US and international organization for entrepreneurs from Africa to the world, and he commented about the fact that he was quite surprised with why Cape Town sort of indexed so highly with entrepreneurs and founders. And I think it comes down to the diversity of people that are on campus, and that sort of melting pot of cultures and backgrounds can really spark a lot of sort of innovation. So I think, unlike other ecosystems like the US or the UK and that, where, you've got, maybe a rich uncle or parents to fund your startup. I think if you're smart enough and you get into university, generally you can pass your courses, but then you've got time to actually invest in building businesses with other like-minded peoples. So I think it's absolutely crucial. It's kind of taking from the traditional model of incubators and stuff in universities. So I think it's naturally, where other smart people come in, and mindset, people who have come from maybe sort of Mpumalanga or Northwest Province or Limpopo, and basically now in Cape Town, and then they'll find other like-minded people who have made it, into university. And that's quite interesting when you put those different, sort of personalities together. But I think the one thing that's always missing, and I see it with all the entrepreneurs that come out of any sort of program, whether it's also the international programs where they might have done a PhD sort of study in the particular technology, and then they launch a business. And these are the soft skills, like sales in particular. I think those are things that we could, invest a lot of time in and to developing, because, South Africa and the English language from South Africans is quite a neutral accent, so it can be applied in different markets, so I'm very passionate about actually training and coaching sales, for technology companies, because, it's one of the most valuable skills that is missing from most companies that I see and I advise. And it's something that gets learnt on the job. It gets trained within a company. It's not something you can go do a university course on sales. It's something that's learnt on the job, but it also needs a different type of personality to thrive in it, being extroverted, and also very sort of empathetic to consumers.
Yeah, definitely. So as we reach the end of our conversation, which has been quite interesting, and we've spoken about the resilience of the South African market, its future perspective, what things need to be done. Looking ahead at the South African startup scene, what developments do you foresee within the startup ecosystem kind of developing?
Yeah, so I think that I actually did write a sort of a future piece about this, the sort of predictions about the market. I think that obviously I think everyone is waiting for the elections to see what happens. I think globally with all the elections, whether it's in the US and India, South Africa, which is actually slowing down the economy, because like corporates don't want to work in a new project with a new company. So it is actually, I'm seeing it in the market with that. So I think with South Africa, I think it's becoming more important that, putting your money where your mouth is and less of a talk shop around entrepreneurship and supporting it is becoming, a bit stale. So some action has to be made. There's been a lot of effort done on the SA Startup Act, and I'm very supportive of, Alison and the team, who are sort of, giving of their time to kind of get government to support that initiative. So that's one of the things. And I think it is just more capital. When we have more capital in the market, we can fund companies. Those companies can hire people. and they can build their product, so I think funding is always a key accelerant for the sector. I do see more exits coming out of the market, that international companies will say, well, I could build it, but it's going to take me 18 to 24 months, or I can buy it from sort of South Africa and I get this amazing team that can be sort of integrated within my sort of global team. So I do believe there's going to be a lot more sort of M&A activity in the market. I think that there's going to be, I also think that there's going to be a lot of, entrepreneurs that don't get funding. I think the badge of honor, it's kind of like you go to a VC and you say, do I need to raise money? It's like going to a surgeon or a barber and saying, do I need a haircut or do I need a surgery? Obviously that's their business model. They need to invest, but the badge of honor for a founder or a startup, is one that's actually, owns all their equity, bootstrap the business, grown the business. And now when they do sell their business, they take all the proceeds, and they divide it amongst the founders. And obviously there might be some employee share schemes that they pay out. So that is the best step. I am also seeing a lot of the founders who are buying back their shares, so a bit of a management buyout. I've been speaking to two founders who want to do that, and they asking my assistance to how they can do that. So I'm seeing a lot of those because I think entrepreneurs in particular and founders are looking at what value does the funder provide to them. Obviously the advice is one part of it, but access to markets is a massive one. So if you are a VC listening to this, it is a case of how can you introduce your portfolio companies or your investment companies to customers, because that's a win-win for everyone. You're going to sort of, de-risk your investment. You're going to sort of show that product and that company has got a product market fit. So those are some of the things that I'm seeing. But also I think, like talking about the elephant in the room, I do think that there are going to be, especially in Africa, a lot more failures. I think that, when money was cheap and people were throwing it at companies, I think some big names are going to be sort of challenged, especially those ones that raised a lot of money, because, if you don't have your unit economics, right, and your cultures around sort of raise the next round, VCs at the moment, and investors are looking at your capital efficiency. How much have you raised? What is your annual recurring revenue? And if there's no way in which for that investment to be paid back, then it's going to be sort of down rounds. And the problem with down rounds is signals to the next investment that essentially the valuation is much lower. And but I think that's where people like, and communities like the Board of Wisdom can come in and help those companies and those CEOs and those boards to navigate that very complicated process, and to give advice for those companies. And just finally, I think the model that we looked at was, how can you within 20 days with the core team, founding team, give advice in the memo for the board and for the CEO or for the VC to say, listen, this is where we think we can help the company. And then after that, there's kind of a paid engagement where the expert who's best positioned to support that company can then work directly with the team for a short space of time. It's not one of these consultancies that last forever, because as we know, those are expensive. And if you're not going to be showing value and helping that business turn around in the short space of time, you're not going to win.
Yeah, definitely. So as we conclude, I usually ask this question to everyone. What piece of advice would you give to any inspiring entrepreneurs in terms of, what advice would you give yourself like 20 years ago, that before you started, like, this is what I would have loved to know?
Yeah, I think that, I think not enough, focus, is given to like founder wellness, and mental wellness. And generally, for African founders and, where there's, you don't really talk about your feelings or whatnot, but That's why I picked more being on the entrepreneur side as opposed to on the fund side, because, I can help more founders if I do know that they are struggling, and how can I help them sort of navigate out of those situations? Because I was that founder. I was the one who had a bit of a mental breakdown, who was depressed and saw my baby fail, and all that sort of the challenges that you face, and essentially just having more people who talk about that, and who know that there are people to support you if you are going through a bit of a rough patch. I think that the psychological support side of entrepreneurship is really needed. And I think that the stats talk for themselves. I think like 70% of all entrepreneurs have some level of sort of anguish and mental health issues. So this is a serious challenge that we need to face and support in the ecosystem.
Yeah, definitely. I think everyone goes through moments of depression, and if you're not seeking the help necessary to kind of maneuver you out of that, it kind of gets difficult. Especially if you are a solo entrepreneur or you're starting this thing by yourself, so you need that environment to kind of help you kind of grow, or help you in those moments where you feel like it's not working for you. So yeah, that's definitely a thing that's
especially in some, as we know, in some of our languages, there's not a word for depression. It's like, and then also as an entrepreneur as well, it's like, you're depressed and you're an entrepreneur. I can't understand. What do you do? It's like, so I think it's just being sort of educating people around us as to kind of this journey and this incredibly value adding sort of industry that we are part of, because as we know, most innovation came from entrepreneurs, whether it was, M-Pesa or the iPhone or any new invention came from an entrepreneur. So it's so valuable that we support the ecosystem and those individuals.
Yeah, definitely. So that is it from us. It was lovely having you on the show. I quite enjoyed this conversation. I don't know, where can our listeners find you if they're looking to kind of get more feedback from you?
Yeah, so I'm very active on LinkedIn. That is my dopamine addiction, and I generally will share my thoughts and journeys on entrepreneurship. And also underneath my profile, you'll see that there's a copy of that book you can download. But also, anyone who's in Cape Town are invited to attend one of my walks. So it's every Friday, 6:00. Come rain or shine. I think wind is a challenge. We tried to go up when it was very windy. No, exactly. It's the 50 knots is the cutoff, which I once went up, and I will never do that again. So, and it's great. There's generally about 5 or 10 of us. So it's a lovely group, and most people ask me like, how do you get invited? I said, no, you just got to ask, and then you get invited, and then you got to show up at 6:00, and then you climb the mountain. It's beautiful, though. It's one of those things. It's a bit like entrepreneurship. It's a challenge every step, and you're with a great group of people. So something that I've committed to doing, and I've done it over 50 times and met 500 people, so it's been very valuable for me.
Then that's where you'll find well. And that is it from us.